Hello and welcome to Lesson 4 on this series on making a game in Unity created for the students at Saturday Academy. I am Will Patillo, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit more interesting with this AI third-person controller. We're going to make them patrol around a number of different points. And so to start out with that, let's go select this AI third-person controller, and I'm going to give this create a new empty game object, and we'll call it a target. So if I activate this character, and then I'm going to set their target to this target. Move this over here. And now I'll just watch what happens. So I go into my scene view, and so my target is over here, and my AI character is following it. And if I move my target around, the AI will chase it instead of the player. Now, how this is effectively going to work, this patrolling behavior is going to work, is whenever the AI reaches the target will jump to another location, and once they reach that, it'll jump to another location, and then to another, and then to another. And they'll just have a repeating cycle of jumping around between a set of specified points, and that's how our patrol path basically is going to work. So one thing first, though, for just a little bit of cleanliness, since we have these two things that go together, I'm going to create a new empty game object right here. It doesn't really matter where it is, and I'm going to call this select and call it NPC container. And I'm going to put my third-person controller and the target inside of this container. The container is not going to, it's just an empty game object. This is just to keep these things together so we're not cluttering up our scene hierarchy. All right, next on this target, I'm going to add our ContactEvent script to this and make our object of interest the AI third-person controller, because remember, this is whenever the AI gets close to it. And also for this ContactEvent to work, it's going to need a collider that with a trigger set. So let's see, give it a sphere collider, and let's maybe increase the radius a little bit. Let's see, maybe 1.2. That should be good enough. And then next, I'm in this NPC container. Create an empty game object, and I'm going to call this path. And then inside of path, create an empty game object called Waypoint, and I'll just call put in parentheses 0. You don't have to name it this way. Names are arbitrary in the hierarchy, but one nice thing about using parentheses 0 is now I can just select it and press Control D, and then they all just follow a consistent naming convention. Go 1, 2, 3, and so on. So now I can take these waypoints and I'll just move them around to different locations. So I'll maybe put this one over here, and this one maybe a long ways this way, and then this third one somewhere out in this direction. Okay, so now our path is in, we have 4 different points, so waypoint 0, 1, 2, and 3. Now this target, I'm going to have it start out at the same location as waypoint 0. So for that, I can just, let's see, make it a child of this, and then 0 out its position, and then move it right back to where it was. So now target is at waypoint 0. And then on enter, I can give this target the ability to jump to position of the next waypoint. So add a component, jump to position right here. So then on contact, have itself jump to position, and for now we'll just go to waypoint 1. Right, so now what I expect to see is that the AI will will follow its target, and once it reaches the target, this target will jump from here over to here, and now the AI will follow it over to that location. So if I run this and just watch it in scene view, I see my AI is actually not reached it yet, and that is because the size of my collider is not big enough for it to reach, so I can just increase its radius to 1.5. Oh, and I also need to make sure that trigger is ticked, and now it's jumped over there. So let's, those changes didn't save because that was in play mode, so increase its radius again, set it to trigger, and we'll just see it operate. Alright, so my AI hits that, and then it jumps over there, and then it gets to it. And then once it gets here, this contact event fires again and sets its waypoint 1 to the place that it already is, and so the AI stops. Alright, so far so good, but now I need this collider just to keep jumping from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3, and then when it's done, to go back to 0. And that's currently not quite possible just yet. So I'm going to extend this jump to position script. Instead of jumping to a specific location, I'd like to cycle between an array of locations. So this will have a public, let's actually transform, and then put an open close brackets to make it an array. Public transform, and I'll call this locations. So this can store multiple locations, and actually this doesn't need to be public. I can just use the serialize field. Okay. Serialize field transform array of transform locations. So now we can see here in our target, this jump to position, I have a list of locations, and now I can add a 4 to the size, and now 4 show up, and I can drag each of these to each of these slots. So I can have waypoint 0 there, waypoint 1 here, waypoint 2 here, and waypoint 3 here. Okay, well that's good. Now I have 4 locations that I move between. Now I need to actually cycle between them. So I'm going to create a new public method called public void cycle position. Doesn't really need any arguments. And oh yes, another variable I'm going to need here is int current position index. Okay, so I'm going to track my current position index. By default, I'll just have this be 0. And now, so I have a variable that's initialized to 0, and in the cycle position, the first time I run into it, I want to jump to location of the element 1 of this array. Then when I call this again, then I'll go to element 2 of the array. So let's just code that out, and we'll see how it works then. So first I'll say current position index plus plus. So whatever the current position is, I go to the next one, and then I will say, just use this functionality I have already, jump to location, and then pass it the argument locations current position index. This will take the value of the current position index and go to that index of the locations array. So if current position index is 1, then we'll jump to this point. If current location index is 2, then we go to this point. If it's 3, then we go to this point. Now you can imagine there'll be an error if, so suppose its current position index is 3, and then we call this again. This will make it 4, and we'll be outside of the bounds of the array. So we need a way to cycle back. So right here, after current position index plus plus, just put in an if statement, so check if we're at the end of the array. If current position index is greater than or equal to locations.length, then current position index equals 0. So if we go into this and it's already at 3, and then this raises it to 4, well, this locations array only has 0, 1, 2, only goes up to element 3. 4 would be outside of the array, but 4 is equal to locations.length, so this will be true. Then we'll get to this line, which sets it back to 0, and now we'll jump to location of the 0th element of the array, which is waypoint 0. So now we can see this in operation. I'll go to my target, and right here, instead of jump to position, jump to location, I'll go jump to position and cycle position, so that we're actually using this cycle position method. So I'll save that and run it, and let's see what happens. So my AI moves there, it hits that, then the thing moves to the next one, and to the next one, and then it cycles back to the starting point. And it will just continue doing this forever. The next thing is I'd like it to be able to see the player if the player is within its vision range, and if it sees the player, then switch from this behavior of patrolling between various positions to following the player. Now we already know we already have a easy way of getting this to follow the player. All I ultimately need to do is to swap out its target for the player character. Now it's following, and if I swap it back to target, then it'll return to its patrolling path, or at least it should. Where is target? And yes, for whatever reason, the AI character is kind of glitching out, but notwithstanding that, it's following the target again, and it's back to patrol. I'll start out by taking this AI character, and I'm going to move them a little bit away from the player so they're not seeing them right off the bat. And maybe I'll make our character a little bit further away. Okay, and now in my AI third-person controller, I'm going to add another collider to this. And actually, I think I'll just make it a child of this. So go 3D object cube, deactivate the mesh renderer, and I'll move this up out a little bit, and I'm going to call this vision box. So this box, or this collider, is going to represent the area in which this AI can see. So I can make this bigger by just increasing the scale right here. So maybe I'll give it a width, let's say 5, and a distance of 15. Give it a nice, fairly decently sized vision right here. You can have like that, or you can adjust it however you like. And now, so whenever this box runs into the player, that's when they're able to see the player, and whenever the box leaves the player, that's when they can't see them. So since this involves objects hitting each other, I'm going to mark this as trigger, and then look for our very, very useful contact event, setting the object of interest to the player. Then in onEnter, I can just access this target field like so. So with the vision box, bring in the AI third-person controller, because that's the object being affected, and then I look for its AI character control, because that's the component with the field we want to change. And we can just go, there's this very handy set target field that is built in to this character controller. So right here, so when the player enters this vision box, we set its target to the player. And that's good. Let's see if this works so far. So I'm here, and my AI is running around, and now I'll walk into its path, and now it's following me. Now there's a bit of a problem in that it'll never not follow me. Even if I get a long ways off, the AI is still trying to follow the player and failing terribly. what I would want to have happen is once I leave the view to be able to have it to go back to patrolling. However, right now we don't have an on-exit event just yet. So let's fix that and have something happen when the player leaves the vision box. So it's actually going to be very similar to this on trigger enter. So I'm going to start by copying and pasting that. Control C, Control V. And so instead of on trigger enter, I'll have on trigger exit. In addition to having an on enter Unity event, I'll create another Unity event. So just copy this line, Control C, Control V, and on exit. Create a new Unity event. And then here, in this on exit, if we pass all of our conditions, which are the same as before, then we call this on exit Unity event. Okay. So now that will show up right here, and I click the plus, and now I basically do the same process as up here, except I set its target back to target. So bring in AI third person controller, look for AI character control, set target, and bring that back to target. So now if I run the game, okay, the AI is patrolling between a set number of paths, and now they saw me, they're following me. I'm going to go over here, I'm going to go to my teleport and jump away, so now they can't see me anymore. And now the AI is back to patrolling. Alright, so that's going to be it for our functionality, but there's one more change I'd like to make to this contact event, which I had forgotten about. I was planning to add this to the previous video, but I'll just get to it now. So currently, everything in the contact event is assuming trigger collisions. That is, this trigger box is ticked. What the isTrigger does, by the way, is a collider does two things. One, it has things run into each other so that they can't pass each other. That allows them to be solid objects that collide. And then they also fire trigger events. isTrigger only fires trigger events and doesn't stop things from moving through each other. When isTrigger is not ticked, it'll still notice events so that it can respond to them, but it will also block a movement. And so far, everything has made sense to use the isTrigger checked. But suppose you wanted to use this contact event functionality and on something that is solid, that stops the thing that's running into it. So we're going to expand this out to make this a little bit more versatile. And I'll just put up at the top, void on collision enter and collision other. So this contains additional information, including the collider, but also some other things as well, such as the velocity of the collision. However, since the logic in our contact event of a trigger enter versus a collision enter is the same, we can just use this code we've already written and just in our on collision enter say on trigger enter other.collider. Since on trigger enter is expecting a collider, not a collision, we just get the collider of the collision and pass that along. Then up here, so for the same thing for on collision exit, so on collision exit, collision other, then on trigger exit other.collider. Right, so now our contact event will work both for collisions and for triggers. So just with these scripts we've created already, there's lots of functionality that you could build and explore. That is all for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm Will Patillo, signing out.